Okay, we're going to be talking through cellular respiration, which is concept 5. So, we know that all energy basically comes from the sun, but we can only use it as ATP. Concept 4, we talked about photosynthesis, which takes the energy from the sun and stores it in sugar. But that still doesn't help consumers because we can't do that process. So, we have to eat foods that have macromolecules and sugars like glucose in them, and then break those foods down in cellular respiration in order to create ATP, which we can actually use. So we're going to be talking about that today. So the goal of cellular respiration is to convert the chemical energy that's in the food you eat, like in glucose, to chemical energy stored in ATP. Because remember, we learned in concept 2 that food is like a check and ATP is like cash. ATP is the only thing that directly powers your body. We use carbohydrates first for energy, but any food that you eat could be processed or broken down as a source of energy. And here's the chemical equation, which you saw in concept 1 when we talked about enzymes and key biochemical reactions. But let's break it down. Remember, reactants are ingredients. In cellular respiration, your ingredients are glucose and oxygen, and then your products or results are carbon dioxide and water. Now, energy is released in the form of ATP from this process, but we don't necessarily call it like a product in the chemical reaction. Cellular respiration is mainly happening in the mitochondria, which we learned about in our cells unit. We learned about organelles. But we do need to know that the mitochondria has 2 main parts, similar to how the chloroplast had 2 main parts. It has the inner membrane, which is this like folded part in the middle. And then it has the matrix, which is like the fluid substance that fills the space. So just like the chloroplast has a membraney part and then a fluid part. All right, there's kind of like a pre-step before cellular respiration really gets going. So some people call it like the first step of cellular respiration. Some people call it the pre-step, but it's just kind of happening at the beginning. And it's called glycolysis. And in glycolysis, we're breaking down glucose. So the purpose is to split this 6-carbon molecule of glucose. Remember, it's C6H12O6. We're going to split it in half into 2 parts, into 2 3-carbon molecules, which are called pyruvates. And this process happens in the cytoplasm, so we're not even in the mitochondria yet. And it doesn't require oxygen, so it's an anaerobic process. Anaerobic means without oxygen. An is a prefix for without. So it can happen without oxygen. It also produces 2 ATPs total, which is important. We're going to be keeping track of how many ATPs are made, because remember, the whole purpose of this entire process is to make ATP. So this step makes 2. It also makes 2 NADHs. So not NADPH, that was an energy-carrying molecule in photosynthesis, but NADH, which is another energy-carrying molecule that helps power the steps of cellular respiration. All right, after glycolysis, the cell has to make a decision. If oxygen is available, the cell is going to go through a 2-step process called aerobic respiration to obtain energy. If it's not present, it's going to go through anaerobic respiration or fermentation. So we've got glycolysis. If O2 is available, we're going to do aerobic. If it's not, we're going to do anaerobic, and we're going to talk through both of these. So first, is oxygen available? We're going to do aerobic respiration. So when people are talking about cellular respiration, they're generally referring to aerobic respiration, which has 2 main steps like photosynthesis. First is the citric acid cycle, also known as the Krebs cycle, and it happens in the mitochondrial matrix, so in the fluid part of the mitochondria. And basically, those 2 pyruvate molecules from glycolysis go through a bunch of chemical reactions, and they make 2 ATP, and then some NADH and another energy-carrying molecule called FADH2. It also releases carbon dioxide as a waste product during this step. Then the NADH and the FADH2 go on to power this next step, which is the electron transport chain. Notice the ETC was the first step of photosynthesis, but it's the second step of cellular respiration because they're basically opposites, which we'll look at in a minute. But its location is in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. And in this, it's going to be a bunch of chemical reactions. We're going to use electrons and hydrogens from the Krebs cycle. And basically, what's going to happen is 34 ATP are going to be made, and also water. So this is really important. The most ATP comes from this step. So we got 2 from glycolysis, 2 from Krebs cycle, and 34 from ETC. So we're getting about 38 total, although some people don't include the glycolysis ones in the total count, so it's 36 to 38 if it works perfectly. So I want you to think about similarities between photosynthesis and respiration. I want you to look at the chart in your packet, I don't remember the exact page number, and try to fill it in. And then once you've done that, here's the kind of the answer, but you can see the similarities. You can see that the equations are opposite. Photosynthesis is endo, while cellular respiration is exo. The reactants of photosynthesis are the products of cellular respiration and vice versa. You can also see the similarities here. They're super similar processes, but they're basically just opposites. Now, that is aerobic. If oxygen is unavailable, your body's basically forced to do anaerobic respiration, which is also known as fermentation. And there's 2 types, depending on the type of organism you are. So you can do lactic acid fermentation or alcohol fermentation. So lactic acid fermentation is what some bacteria do, but it's what animal cells like you do, and it happens in your muscle cells. Basically, that pyruvate from glycolysis gets converted into lactic acid, and then it only makes 2 ATP. So we're getting way less ATP from this process, but we're still getting some. But that lactic acid that results is what makes you feel sore. Because when you're working out, you're breathing, but you're not breathing as well, so you're not getting as much oxygen. So it can force your body to do anaerobic respiration. And then you get that lactic acid in your muscles, which makes you feel sore. Alcohol fermentation occurs in yeast when oxygen is not available, and it takes those pyruvates from glycolysis and it breaks it down into alcohol, carbon dioxide, and 2 ATP. So let's look at the total ATP produced. In aerobic respiration, you're getting 36 to 38, because you got 2 from glycolysis, 2 ATP from Krebs cycle, and then 34 from the ETC. Anaerobic, though, you're only getting 2 to 4. Because you're getting the 2 from glycolysis and then the 2 from the other steps, whether that's lactic acid or alcohol fermentation. All right, let's look at how these 2 key biochemical reactions of photosynthesis and cellular respiration connect. So we got the chloroplast, we got the mitochondria. In photosynthesis, light energy is absorbed and CO2 goes in, and we use that CO2 to make sugar, and then we use water to make oxygen. In cellular respiration, we're going to take in sugar and make carbon dioxide, and take in oxygen and make water, and then we're going to release energy in the form of ATP. So you can see how it's a cyclical effect of how these relate to each other. And we're going to practice this so much more, especially the interrelationships and the interconnections of these processes in class.